Just coming up to 8:25. You're listening to BBC Newcastle Radio for the North East. If you're yet another new listener, great to have you on board. Get involved with any stories that we cover. We do like to hear from you. And we have heard that the North East is in the middle of a quiet revolution. It's pushing up our environmental credentials, we'll have you know. And that's according to an energy expert from Durham University. We'll hear from him in just a moment.
Now, this morning on BBC Newcastle, we've been looking at who's making it happen, from Durham County Council dimming its street lights to a bus company in Newcastle using buses that are literally green.
And then there are the quiet revolutionaries in Northumberland trying to secure government money to install solar panels on public buildings. That's in Belford. Roy Dodds is one of them.
Some people think it's not efficient, but when you take into account the increasing availability of solar panels, China is making them by the million, and the carbon footprint of this village could be reduced dramatically.
Well, some of the projects are a little more controversial, such as switching off escalators in metro stations during off-peak times to save energy. Metro operators DB Tyne and Weir say they're receiving positive feedback from customers, but these people are not convinced.
It's a bit frustrating at this, like with it being so busy, like for the summer holidays and things.
I think it's good, saving energy.
Environmentally friendly as well, of course.
Yeah.
I can understand where they're coming from, that idea, but it's like a lot of ideas, it doesn't work.
Oh, there's the verdict. Well, let's speak to Professor Richard Davis, an energy expert from Durham University. Good morning, Professor Davis.
Good morning.
Now, the initiatives we've been talking about, there's quite a range there. Why do you think they represent a quiet revolution?
Well, this is just a sign of what's taking place around the UK, around Europe. There are big targets that have been set by the EU and by the UK, and even by Newcastle City Council, to reduce our carbon footprint. And so it's not surprising we're starting to see evidence of measures to reduce demand, such as switching off escalators, and also measures to create more renewable energy. This is an absolutely sensible way of proceeding in order to reduce our carbon footprint and also develop and change with what is clearly an evolving situation across the globe and in the EU and in the UK.
Over the past few years, a number of people have called BBC Newcastle to talk about public buildings and the lights being on when they don't need to be. Grand office blocks filled with lights that are just wasting electricity, which would, of course, save money for the public purse and the taxpayer. So are you surprised that not everyone is happy about these changes?
I'm not entirely surprised, because I think it's human nature that we tend to switch on a light and expect it to work. And I think most of my generation it becomes absolutely common that, and assumed that electricity is at our fingertips. But I think we've got to be far more aware of the cost of energy. We've effectively had energy far too cheap, believe it or not, because we've had fossil fuels, coal and oil and gas. We've effectively had it far too cheap. We've taken it for granted, and I think that has to change, and that's a big cultural and behavioural change that we need to start to see.
Let's bring in Ben Pyle, who's been listening. He writes on environmental issues for Spiked Online and is a blogger. Ben, where do you stand when it comes to these kind of ideas, the likes of streetlight dimming?
Well, nobody's against efficiency, but what really concerns me is that this is a relentless drive to cut energy use for the sake of the environment. But it's cutting things that we actually need and are actually quite useful, whether that's energy in our homes or lights in the streets. Street lighting makes our journey safer and easier, and escalators in public buildings make it easier for people who have problems getting around or struggling with shopping. So rather than finding ways of cutting energy use, I think energy experts really should be about finding ways of making it cheaper, because fuel prices are rising quite considerably at the moment, and now there are more than 5.5 million people in the UK, 5.5 million households in the UK living in fuel poverty, thanks in part to these kind of energy saving schemes, which are now also threatening jobs in energy and intensive industries.
But are they not minor inconveniences? We can put up with an escalator not being on at a certain time of day, or lights not being on at a certain time of night.
Well, sure, those kind of things are quite trivial. I mean, for most people. But I mean, I think when these things are part of a much broader set of policies and strategies. I mean, it's called a revolution, But I don't see anyone marching in the street for it. This is a revolution that's being sort of started by the likes of Chris Huhne and the government, not by you or I.
Who do you think should bankroll these kind of ideas? The public purse?
Well, I'm not convinced that the public purse should be involved in that sort of thing. I mean, I've got nothing against lowering the carbon intensity of energy. I don't think anyone has. But I think that they should be sort of technology driven rather than policy driven, because those kind of policies are very expensive, and as we can see now, they're causing jobs to be lost in the energy-intensive sector.
OK, thank you very much for joining us. That was Ben Pyle. Before that, Professor Richard Davis. So we'd like your thoughts on this. Have you noticed, have you observed a greener initiative where you live? And if so, what do you think of it? 0191 232 65